Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Tammy Patzer, and I am happy to introduce you to today's guest, Brian Douglas. Brian is an attorney in Atlanta, Georgia, and he helps individuals and families preserve their legacy through estate planning. Welcome, Brian.
Thanks for having me, Tammy.
No problem. I'm really excited about this topic because everybody needs to think about their legacy at some point in time. And I don't think it really matters if you're young, middle-aged, or older. It's an important topic. So who do you help with this planning?
We help pretty much everyone. I kind of joke with some of my colleagues who are divorce attorneys, and I say, the statistics for divorce say that half the people that get married will get divorced. So your target audience is only half the population, if you will, or at least the married population. But as we all know, the statistics for death is 100%. We all are going to pass away at some point in time. So we offer our services to everyone. Generally, I kind of put them into three different buckets, if you will. There's the young family that's starting out, or the younger individuals that maybe have children or about to have children or starting a family. Their assets may not be, where they're going to be in 30, 40 years, but they have considerations that are unique to that situation, meaning if something happens to them, I kind of use the Titanic as the example. The boat sinks. So what happens? Mom and dad go on the cruise and the boat sinks. Now, you and I know that doesn't happen very often, but those types of things can happen and do happen. Who gets the children? What happens to the children? Who gets the house? The children would maybe get it, but you don't want to leave a house or a car or a 401k or a life insurance policy to a 3-year-old. So that's, that's kind of one of the first places where people will start. Then you get maybe the empty nesters. Children have gotten through college. They're moving on. They've accumulated some assets. They're still working. They're still accumulating assets, but retirement's out there on the horizon. They're not there yet, but they can see it. They have a unique kind of level of planning that we look at and that we do with them. And there's a lot. There's a very powerful set of tools and planning that we can do for them because they're approaching what is that third category, which is the retired people. Long-term care, fixed income, the assets that they've had for the most part are what they're going to have, and that's going to take them through the rest of their life and beyond. But with the aging population that we have, with the baby boomers, with people living so much longer through medical technology, long-term care and health issues is a huge concern, coupled with the skyrocketing cost of health insurance, or health care insurance as well. But the skyrocketing cost of healthcare can bankrupt people. You can be nursing home poor, meaning every dime that you have just gets sucked into the care of you or your spouse or a parent, depending on whoever you are.
So you have three basic categories. Your young people, they could be single or married. Then as we travel through time, the empty nester people who are saying, oh, I raised my kids, they're off to college, and now I have to think about what's happening in the next 20 years or so. And then, of course, like you said, the older people. So let's go ahead and maybe give one little piece of a tip about if I'm a younger person, what should I be really focusing on in my younger years?
So the planning for younger people, frankly, isn't all that much different than older people, with the exception of a couple things. Generally, the younger people will have younger children. They have minor children, So the planning I'm going to do for my minor children would be different than the planning that someone would do for their adult children, because just the same thing. You don't want to have a 10-year-old or even a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old, even if they're not legally a minor. You don't want to give them a bunch of money or property because they need to have some rules to go along with it. They may or may not be, emotionally and financially, secure and educated enough to handle those sorts of things. So anything that you were to give them, you would want to give them with a certain rule book. Obviously, if they're under 18, one of the biggest considerations for people and parents, if you will, in their planning is who will raise my children if I'm not here to raise my children myself. Who identifying who shares the values and the social customs and norms and everything that's important to you and your spouse if something were to happen to the two of you and you could no longer raise your children. I get that phone call a lot. It kind of makes me laugh because I can always tell when we're going to get to that point in the call. And it's usually a younger mother, usually first-time mother as well, first child. And the child's about a year to 2 years old, and they're taking their first trip together, and they're leaving the baby with grandma or whomever it may be. It doesn't matter. And mom is getting nervous about what if something happens? Who's going to raise my baby? And I get it. I mean, we've all been there as parents and go through those thoughts. But it's funny because as the conversation evolves, just in the initial phone call when they call in, it always ends up, well, I want to really make sure that my family gets the child and that my parents raise the baby, or my sister or my brother. And then it goes a little further, and then she'll say, what I really want is to make sure his family doesn't raise the baby. So, and it always makes me laugh because it takes them a while to really openly admit that and say that, but that's ultimately where I can generally tell where the conversation is headed. Is she wants to make sure not only that it is her family that gets the child, but his family is also precluded from getting, the in-laws versus the outlaws kind of thing, I guess. But yeah, I think that younger couple, the biggest point that I see, the biggest consideration is the raising of the children if you are no longer able to do so. There are other financial tools and tips, and there's a lot of great things that young people can do. Life insurance, I'm an attorney, not an insurance salesman, but life insurance only gets more expensive as you get older, and it's such an important thing. But sadly, so many people don't realize that until they're older in life, and the premiums have gone up, 10 times versus what you could get when you're younger. So there's a million tools and tricks and tips, but yeah, those, I think the family preservation and who will raise the children physically, who would get custody of them, families are so spread out. Where do they go? Meaning, my sister lives in Milwaukee, and so if something happened to me, do I uproot, or me and my wife, do I uproot my children and send them to Wisconsin to where they don't know anybody, they don't have any friends up there, but we have family. Those types of decisions require a lot of thought and a lot of exploration.
So basically, it's never too early to talk to an attorney about planning your estate and your legacy and what happens to your family situation. When you also talk about a legacy planning, what exactly does that mean in the overall scheme of things? I know some people, it's like everything goes to my family, but other people want to leave a legacy to a larger group of people. So can you talk a little bit about legacy planning?
Sure. So legacy, we all know what legacy means, the textbook definition of it, but I really hesitate to define it in, specifically whenever I meet with someone, because my goal is to determine what legacy means to you. Because and you said it very well, my legacy and whether it goes to my family may be very different if your legacy, everything goes to your university that you went to, or to a charity, or to your church, whatever that may be. But that's precisely what it is. It's the person or the family's goals on what they want, how they want to be remembered, how they want to define their own legacy. I see a lot of people that say, Brian, we're fine. We raised our children. We put them through college. They've got decent jobs. They're doing well. I don't really care that my children get anything from me, but I would like my grandchildren to get from me. I'd like to have, college funds set aside for my grandchildren if there's money left over. I don't want to give it to my kids so they can go and blow it on whatever, because they got decent jobs and we did everything for them, and they're where they need to be in life, and they're self-sufficient. So it's a very personal question, and it's a very personal answer on how you define that. Like I said, you see churches, you see different charities, animal, places, people, whatever moves you in life, you have the ability to benefit, they have the ability to benefit from you after you're gone. If you want to leave them a gift, or if you want to do something in some way to show an organization or charity or a person for that matter, that they were really important to you. It's always heartwarming to me when I work with someone and we're going through the process, and I get to, you have to learn the lay of the land. I have to know who all the players are, who the family members are, the children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, whatever the case may be. you find out very quickly who people's circle is, or that surround them and what's important to them, and then they'll throw in this other person, and so I always get to ask the question, well, who's that? Is that how's that person connected? Is that a child of a niece or whatever, and they tell you a story like, no, that person was really great to my mother when she was sick, or that person did this for me when I was young, or whatever. And when people remember that, I mean, it's just so special because first of all, they're not expecting anything from you. That type of gift, like those are the favorite kind that I mean, the few times that it's ever happened to me in my life, and even in very small amounts, but I was remembered in a couple people's wills that I would have never expected to be remembered in. And they weren't clients or anything like that. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not trying to write myself in your will, which if you don't want to give it to anybody else, I'll just spell Brian with an I, not with a Y. So certainly you're free to leave it to me. But the reality is these were people that I just didn't expect it. And it was so heartwarming to me that somebody thought enough about me and the relationship that we had that they wrote me in there and they gave me something or they did something, or it was just, it didn't have to be big. It wasn't millions of dollars or life changing. It probably wasn't, it wasn't even thousands of dollars in reality. It was very, very small and insignificant. The gift was insignificant, but the thought and the sentiment lasted a long time. And I've got goosebumps telling you this story, just thinking about it right now, because that's how powerful it is. And that's defining your legacy. It doesn't, there's no way, I can't tell you how to define your legacy. I mean, I've got clients that come in and say, Brian, this is what we're going to do. And I hope my last check bounces. I don't care if I leave a dime to my kids. And that's fine too, because that's their legacy and that's what they want. So it's a very, very subjective question.
I think you explained it very well. And like, it just made me think of, it's the thought that counts, and actually to know that you meant something to somebody enough that they would even mention you is a really big gift in itself, to know that you meant something to someone. You mentioned early on about the healthcare planning, and it makes me think of the end of life issues that people have to consider, and about, for example, my father's 89 years old, and he's actually dealing with a situation right now where he's his girlfriend, of longtime girlfriend, who's also 89, has dementia, and they're not married, but he's trying to figure out how to get her help because her family's kind of like, whatever. But it makes me think about these healthcare planning issues and end of life issues, so that you don't put someone who you care about into a situation like my dad is in. He's older, but he's still okay, mentally capable. She really needs to, get help. So what does he do? So talk a little bit about the healthcare planning and end of life issues that people should be thinking about and getting some information and being educated about.
Sure. So as you said earlier, it's never too early for any of these topics because, tomorrow's never, is never guaranteed for us, right? There's no tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen in 10 seconds, 10 minutes, 10 years, whatever. So it doesn't matter if you're old or young, you can be struck with illness. You can be in an accident and end up in a situation, Terri Schiavo is probably the most famous example. I say her name a lot just because, the media coverage that she got over the course of a year or so. And you remember, she was the woman in Florida that ended up in what was called a persistent vegetative state, where there was a fight between her husband and her parents over what would happen with her and what her true end-of-life decisions were that she hadn't planned. And I want to say, and I may be wrong, I want to say she was young. I want to say she was in her 30s. And she was struck by a weird, cardiac condition that ended up losing oxygen and so on and so forth. And she ended up, in that persistent vegetative state where medical science said she would never recover, and she was basically just being kept alive by machines. So the interesting thing about that case that I think a lot of people don't realize is not what happened, and not the fighting and the fact that the Pope weighed in on it, and the President of the United States weighed in on it, the Supreme Court of the United States, and the governors, and blah, 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 and all the media attention and the media circus that went around it that we saw. To me, that's not the interesting part. The interesting part, or should I say shocking part, is that she lived like that for 13 years. And that's what they didn't talk about. And that's where that wasn't in the news for 13 years. The media cycle that we have in this country is unique. And, they always want the flavor of the day, and they want the sensationalized story, and it's entertainment, and I get all that, and that's a whole other conversation to have. But the point is, while the outrage and everything that happened in this country for that time, a year or so that she was in the news, she lived like that for a long time, and nobody knew who she was, and nobody knew what was going on. And then you think about the fact of however many other people live like that. And so to the point of planning at any age, at any level, regardless of assets, regardless of family, if you have any desires to live that way or to not live that way, the only thing you can do is plan for it. If you end up, falling down the stairs and ended up, with brain damage, and you think you're Abraham Lincoln, you can't take care of yourself anymore. Who makes your medical decisions for you? To the example of your father. But not only that, who takes care of your finances? Who has access to your bank accounts? Who has access to, who's going to pay your bills? Where's the money going to go? Does your house get foreclosed on because nobody can get into your account to pay the bills? So on and so forth. So those issues always exist at any stage of life because anything can happen. The world is a very crazy place, and life can be very strange and cruel and certainly unpredictable at times. So that's one issue of it. The second issue of it in the older age is like the example of your father and his girlfriend, where the diseases of the mind have set in. Most people don't study the long-term care and know about nursing homes and stuff like that until it hits their family. But if you pay attention to it, the fastest growing area of the long-term care world, if you will, I don't know what you call it, the industry, is the memory care facilities. It's not just nursing homes. Now there's specific memory care facilities to deal with dementia and more commonly Alzheimer's, because we're living so long physically, but these diseases of the mind are taking over to where we can't do anything for ourselves. And they're horrible, tragic, diseases to be inflicted with and to have, until they find a cure, we're going to keep dealing with that. But people can live for 10, 20 years with dementia. They can live for that long with Alzheimer's, but they need a tremendous amount of care because they can't take care of themselves. The example of your father's girlfriend is a prime one that I see all the time. People call me and say, Mom's got dementia. We need to get this stuff in place in order to, I need to make medical decisions or to admit her in a nursing home. They want a power of attorney. And I say, okay, great. Do you have one? Let me look at it. Well, no, we need you to do one, Brian. Well, but Mom's incompetent, right? That's the reason the nursing home wants a power of attorney or the bank wants a power of attorney, because they don't trust that Mom can make decisions for herself anymore because of this disease. They're like, yeah, well, you can do it. And then I have to explain to the family that once Mom's incompetent, she's not competent to sign anything, including a power of attorney. So by me generating this document and preparing it and doing it, that really isn't any good because mom doesn't know what she's signing. So then we have to go a whole other route through the legal system in order to get a guardian and a conservator put in place for Mom in order to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. The cost skyrockets because now you're talking court and you're talking a lot of other things versus basically some pre-planning. And the point is that whenever you realize you need these documents, when you need the document, and I put the emphasis on the word need, it's usually too late, right? You have to get these when you don't need them, which I know it seems strange. Like you don't eat when you're not hungry, you eat when you're hungry. We're very reactionary, creatures, I guess, if you will. But in this realm of the world, if you start your planning, if you start the process when you actually need it, it's generally too late. And with a lot of these things, like, with the dementias and things like that, until they cure it, they're not reversible. So Mom's not going to get any better, right? Her brain function is not going to get any better. So doctors are not going to sign letters saying, yeah, Brian, she's okay to sign this power of attorney. She knows what she's doing. I mean, if the doctor's diagnosed her with dementia or with Alzheimer's, unless it's early in, she's never going to get better from that. She's not going to be able to take care of herself and make those decisions that would be legally binding and show that she's competent. So
why do you think people put off this type of planning? I'm listening as you're educating me, and I'm saying it makes perfect sense that I should talk to somebody and literally get my ducks in a row so that I don't put my children through any unnecessary pain and issues if something were to happen to me. But what is it about this type of planning that people have a tendency to just say, I'll do that tomorrow, or I don't really want to think about it. I don't want to do this right now.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Tammy, which is I don't want to deal with it. The ostrich, head in the sand approach. If I don't think about it, it can't hurt me. Death, dying, feeding tubes, incapacity. I mean, when you talk about it in those terms, they're very unpleasant terms to talk about. Nobody wants to think of their own mortality. No one wants to think of, me sitting in a nursing home, not able to do anything, maybe, inflicted with Alzheimer's where my brain still works, fine, but I can't do anything else. So you're a prisoner inside your own body. I mean, those are really depressing and horrible topics to talk about in the greater scheme of life. But I think the education side of it, number one, we don't sit and talk about those things and make it that painful. I mean, the topics come up, but those we plan for those things just by going through the process. It doesn't have to be where we sit here and go through every possible, infliction you could have and every possible horrible thing that could happen to you. I mean, that's not what I want to do. But I think really it's just the issue of the mortality that I don't want to think about dying. And then the cavalier approach, which I hear more often than you would be surprised probably, is that, well, who cares? I'll be dead. It's not my problem. I'll be dead. And then someone else can deal with it. And it's just kind of a way that people can deal with it without, they address it without ever addressing it. And to those people, I always say, well, that's if you're lucky. And what I mean by that is, and I always kind of joke, I'm like, if you're lucky, you're going to go to bed one day and not wake up. That's kind of, as far as getting out of here, getting out of life, that's about the best you can hope for. But there's a lot of other ways that it can go. And, with the Alzheimer's and things like that, where you can be in a bad situation for a long time. And that's, and at that point, what have you done to your family or yourself or whatever that if you haven't done any planning whatsoever? And and I always tell people, like, if you tell me when and how you're going to die, I call it the it, right? It happens to all of us. Mm-hmm. It could be death. I mean, certainly it is death. It could be, you get sued for something and we have asset protection issues because maybe you're a doctor or a lawyer, a professional, you have higher liabilities. It could be you get in a car accident and you get sued for that because something happens. It could be dementia. It could be a young couple having their first child and they're thinking they're going to have natural childbirth and something happens in the middle of this labor and the doctor grabs you and says, emergency C-section right now. I mean, that is a huge medical procedure that happens instantly, right? I mean, I don't know if you've ever gone through it or experienced that, but, all of a sudden now you've got your the mother of the first child being cut in half essentially to do this thing. I mean, and so the medical complications that could come from that are huge. Generally they don't, but you have to be prepared for that if you're that young couple. So it happens to all of us. Now, if you can tell me what your it is, I can plan really, really well for it. It's easy, and so could you. But mm-hmm. Since we don't know what the it is, what we have to do is build in ourselves options. That's really what I do. I mean, we can, in the greatest scheme of life, the best thing that I can do for anybody is give them and their family options for whatever it's exist. And I don't mean we're going to draft a document that's 4,000 pages long and specifically identify every option. I mean, we plan and we use the tools and the documents and the planning strategies that give those options. So if it is this, we use that. If it is that, we use this. And I know it sounds very vague, I guess what I'm saying, but it's the idea of incorporating that planning in order to give those options so that whatever it comes at you, you've got it covered in one way, shape, or form.
I really appreciate you educating us about this, and it is really mind-boggling and something that is really, really important to think about. So I really appreciate that. Where can we find out more about you and your services?
You can go on my website, which is briandouglaslaw.com, and that's Brian with an I, as I joked earlier, BrianDouglaslaw.com.
Okay, great. Well, Brian, I really appreciate this. And I think everyone should take into consideration that it happens. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I spend a tremendous amount of time educating people and families because every time I have a conversation, it's very much the reaction that I just gave you. We open eyes, and not in a bad way, but in a good way, of the importance and the need to do this sort of planning. And I want to leave you with my final thought, which is, with a little bit of planning on the front end, you can cover pretty much anything that happens to you, your family, what you want to happen, what you want to avoid. You can avoid it all with a very minor amount of planning at, generally at reasonable cost. Not to sit and talk about money, but that can also be a concern for people, compared to the emergency situation after the fact when you call me and it's that too late situation, like, we need this now, Brian, because there's an emergency. Generally, I can't give you what you want, and it's going to cost a lot more, and it all could have been avoided so much earlier and so much easier. And then your family in the time of need and crisis isn't having to worry about going to court with me or doing things like that. So I can't stress the importance of a little bit of pre-planning. An ounce of prevention, is worth it's worth it all. And what was it? Was it Patton that said it? Plan to fail is failing to, failing to plan is planning to fail, right? That was what one of his battle cries, or that he taught his subordinates in the Army.
Thanks a lot, Brian.
Thank you.
This is Tammy Patzer. Go have a great day.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.